They probably had 3 SWAT teams and plus a bunch of other assets. Just as we were getting ready to leave, the turret guy noticed near a tree that there was something blue on the ground. The thought was, well, we probably should check the tree before we leave because you don't want somebody behind us. And that's where he ended up being. And he started shooting at us. I had suicidal nightmares that started because the stress of everybody, well, maybe we did something wrong. Maybe this, maybe that. Like I wanted my injury fixed and I wanted to go back to work. I could have one or the other, but I couldn't have both. You can shed a tear, you can do what you want, but at the end of the day, you've got to move forward. You don't get to just be resilient one day. You don't get to go to counseling and be resilient. You have to endure some trauma to become resilient. Everybody needs to realize that your career could be over in the blink of an eye, and it may not even be your fault. Cops today need to be educated and have backup plans for your backup plans, because even your backup plan may not work out. You better have 2 or 3 plans.
Did you have a good New Year's?
Yeah, it was good. It was quiet. It was, mellow. I have 2 little ones, 4 and 2. And so they were asleep by 9. So we did the
East Coast New Year's?
Yeah, we tried that and that was it. And they were fading fast by 8:30.
I didn't make it much further than you. We did East Coast New Year's and then we're probably done by 10.
Oh, nice. No, I was up till 1, but the little ones were done. And so it was very quiet.
Are you somebody who does New Year's resolutions and stuff that you want to accomplish or got sites for the following year?
Not necessarily. I mean, I definitely do like the evaluate your year and how did it go and kind of where you want to go. Resolutions are kind of a mixed blessing, right? If they succeed, great. If they don't, then, kind of puts a damper on your year. So it's really just more about always having that goal list that you're updating.
Let's take you all the way back. As a young boy, where were you born? Where's hometown?
I was born and raised on the central coast of California in the San Luis Obispo area. My grandparents lived in Santa Maria, California. And so I grew up in Atascadero and a little bit in the 5 Cities area down in Aurora Grande.
So born and raised in that area, kind of stayed.
Yeah, I went and traveled a bunch and I've had my time away and back. But in general, I've kind of stayed in that general area. It's a beautiful place to be from.
What was childhood like for you?
It was mixed. I grew up, my grandparents lived in Santa Maria. I lived with them for a while. My mom left when I was 4. So I was raised by my dad, and then he remarried when I was 8. And so they did a his, hers, and ours. So I had an older brother, and then I had a stepbrother and stepsister who I don't refer to that way because they're just my family. And then I have 2 half sisters, but again, they're just all my family. So I don't think of it that way. And so from 8 years old on, that was kind of my life. And so I grew up there and spent time with my grandparents a lot when I was younger.
What took let me put it this way. Did you rehab a relationship with your mom after she left?
No, actually, I didn't have a lot of contact at all. And I ended up tracking her down in Texas in 2012-ish, give or take a year. And, met for the first time in, 40 years. So it was an experience.
Was that beneficial for you?
No, not really. It was more of a curiosity thing than anything else. The conversation was good, but guarded. And it was more of just got to check this box before it's too late kind of thing. I'd already moved past needing a mom or anything. I had someone that filled that role for me from the time I was 8. So I didn't, I wasn't looking for that relationship. I was more just wanting to know. It was more curiosity and making sure that, that you made that connection before it was too late.
I would say for a lot of people, the common thing is not for the mom to be the one to lead the family. So I would just imagine for a young boy growing up, did you find that when you were able to complete the circle, I'll call it, was the stories that you had been told by your father matched up with what your mom had told you?
Not exactly. Everybody had their version of events, even in law enforcement, right? There's 2 sides to every story. But I went in with no preconceived notions. I had grown a lot and dealt with a lot of that as I was growing up. I mean, did it impact me? Of course. Absolutely. How could it not? But you work through it eventually. I mean, you either deal with it or, you handle it or it handles you. Right. And so, growing up, it was definitely an adjustment, but, people have it far worse than I did. But yeah, I would, parents do leave. You're right. Mostly it's the male figures that tend to leave the household. And so, I was raised a lot by my dad and my grandparents. We had babysitters and that kind of thing. But then my dad remarried when I was 8. And so then I was raised by my mom then. And so in a house, we had, 2 parents and 6 kids and,
All of a sudden it got crowded.
yeah, it was very busy. My dad was a fire captain. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so things were always tight, but it was a home. We had a nice, cozy house where we always had roommates, that kind of thing. But we never wanted for anything, but it was always, when you're young, you have no idea what that's all about, right? And so you look back,
you just
now,
adapt.
Right. And you look back now and go, wow, there was a lot of this and not a lot of that. But when you were growing up, you didn't see the world that way.
Right. As far as your biological mom and father, it was just you. You have no other direct siblings from that parent.
My older brother.
Oh, okay.
I have an older brother that's 11 months older than I am.
For him, and as you guys were growing up, did either one of you have a significant memory, or again, I just go back to the anomaly of your mom leaving, and did it really have an impact on you guys, or did you even really notice it?
Oh, yeah, no, I absolutely noticed it. I have no memories before the night she left. I remember the night she left. I can tell you what pajamas I was wearing, where I was standing, when she left us at my grandparents' house. But I have no memories past, prior to that. And so all I remember is that.
Did you know she was leaving that night?
No, she was going to the store and never came back.
With you as a young boy, and I'll transition this now, getting blended, did that blending of siblings ever cause any problems, or did you guys all kind of get along well enough?
No, it had its hiccups. I mean, my older brother and I always had issues too, and then the blending of the families always had its struggles, right? My parents did great, but it was, there was the natural conflict that comes with that. And when you're a kid, you have no idea what an impact your actions or their actions have on you, or your actions on them, right? When you say things or do things that could be damaging, you don't know when you're a kid, right? So you grow up and you live in that moment. And at that moment, your sibling is frustrating you or pissing you off, or you treat them poorly or whatever. So there are a lot of things that we wish we could go back and change. Absolutely. When I look back on my childhood, my brother, myself, the oldest of my sisters and my younger brother, there's things we definitely need to go back and fix. You can't, but when you look back on it from an adult perspective, man, it came with its challenges, but my parents, they really did great. I mean, again, I had a stay-at-home mom. I mean, how many families could say that, right? Especially in today's day and age. So, but yeah, it definitely had an impact and still does. My older brother and I don't really talk. We haven't really since high school. My younger siblings and I keep in contact. They live out with my mom out in Nevada. And, I see them occasionally, they see us occasionally. They came out to our wedding. We went out for their weddings and birthdays and that kind of stuff. So we do keep in touch, but not as close as we were or probably should be.
What took up your time as a young boy? What did you enjoy doing?
School. I was in school, and then I was a musician. I took up music when I was about in 4th grade. But that goes back to when I was young. My grandmother played organ and had, a record player and that kind of stuff. So I always enjoyed listening to music. And I got really involved in music when I was a kid. I tried sports and stuff too. And I played, baseball in elementary school. I tried basketball in junior high. I did wrestling and football in high school. Ultimately landed on swimming, but that was related to a girlfriend. But I did 2 years of swimming, and that was great. But mostly music. My free time revolved around music, and then school other than music.
The swimming aspect, was it traditional competition style swimming, or was it like water polo type?
No, competition swimming. Yeah, it was competition swimming. So I swam my junior and my senior year in high school. And it was a great experience. I mean, team sports, of course, are great too, but this was great for endurance and building and embracing the suck, so to speak, right? Because there's no stopping in the middle of the water, right? You just got to keep going. So I almost drowned as a child. And so it was kind of a big milestone for me to overcome, because I was terrified of the water growing up. And now, I love the water, and I was into ocean rescue and stuff later in my life and various things, but it was always overcoming that fear was a big thing.
Was the driving force though music in your life?
Yeah, for enjoyment and pleasure. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. My hobby growing up was definitely music.
I get where I'm going with this is with the trying of the multiple sports, and if I'm reading this correctly, not one of them really stuck as a passion.
Right.
And so where I'm going was the music that passion, or where was the, I guess, the drive coming from for your adult life or your future? None of those were actually something that you thought, oh, I'm going to carry this into my adult life.
Yeah. So sports, I wasn't really that coordinated as a younger child. My older brother was kind of the sports kid and whatever. And so
Why does it always seem like it's that way?
yeah, I mean, you have to be different than your brother, right? I mean, some siblings though are super tight. I worked with siblings that were 2 years apart where their paths were almost identical. They both played soccer and that kind of stuff. My brother was very much into sports, mostly football and that kind of thing. And I found from a young age that I wasn't as coordinated, So in fifth grade, I tried baseball, I tried soccer, and the ball kept finding my face, stuff like that. So that's why I ended up being the catcher with a face mask. And I've tried football. Wrestling was actually really good. I really enjoyed wrestling, and that translated well to a later law enforcement career for lots of reasons. And then swimming was really good too, just for physical fitness. I really didn't find my coordination, my physical ability till after high school. Then sports came way more naturally, and my physical coordination became much better. But I was
kind of grew into your body.
I did. Yeah, I did. I was very small growing up. I was like the second shortest kid in junior high. And so I didn't hit my stride until my junior, senior year in high school with swimming and that kind of thing. And then right afterwards, now, playing sports is no big deal. But back then, it didn't work out so well. So yeah, music was my hobby and what I did when I wasn't schooling or, working or anything.
What instrument did you play?
Classical and jazz trumpet.
Nothing that ever led to being in a band or anything of those type of?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, nothing professional. I played semi-professional all over the place. I've been fortunate enough to travel all over the world with music. I've played in New York, I've played in Europe, I've played in South Korea. And then locally, ever since I was in fourth grade, basically, I've played in 2 or 3 music groups my entire life.
The playing around the world, was that part of a band and traveling, or was that related to school?
Mostly related to school, but I got to play like at the International Association of Jazz Educators conference in New York, and the Mid-Europe conference in Europe, and there was a big one in South Korea, and I got to spend 10, 12, 21 days traveling and just playing all over the place. And it was a great experience, especially when you're traveling with people that you're friends with and you all have something in common. It was great, but I was, school for me was later. That all took place while I was already working. So I ended up, kind of on my own late high school, early college. And so I was, paying my way for everything, when I was fairly young, about 15 and a half, 16 years old. So
what caused that switch or shift?
Family dynamics.
Just more of, was it driven more by your desire to kind of be out and on your own and away from everything?
There were a lot of different factors that created that dynamic, but ultimately by the time I was 18, I was on my own, and I mean, I drove without a driver's license for a year and did things because I had to take care of myself. And so I learned from a very young age, though, very important lessons. You talk about things that shape your life. I learned from a young age that if you don't work, you don't eat. And so having a job is something that I've had since I was 16 years old, and I've never been without employment and, a full-time employment since I was 18 years old, because you learn lessons the hard way sometimes.
For those that don't know Central California and where you're talking about, Atascadero, Paso, that area, could be considered rural living, small town living, but then alternating that with being able to see the world at a young age. This almost sounds like a rhetorical question because we're going to get to this, but you stayed in that area for your law enforcement career. But was there never a draw to go to the big city?
No, I considered that a lot. So I didn't grow up knowing I was going to be in public safety. Like, I always appreciated public safety. My brother was supposed to be the firefighter to follow after my dad in his footsteps, that kind of thing. I was supposed to go off and become a doctor or a lawyer or something important. I was fairly smart when I was younger, and that was supposed to be my career path. And so
found coordination and lost the academics.
Something like that. I just, you get sidetracked by things. And so, when I was 18, I went and took the military ASVAB test, right? The Scholastic Aptitude Battery Test, and scored fairly well. And so, explored that world for about a year. Never made it to the military, but that's where I was heading, and got sidetracked a little bit with the government, and then came back and spent my time in public safety. I started EMS first when I was 19 years old, and then became a paramedic and worked at the fire service for 6 years, kind of simultaneously. I gave up the fire service to become a police officer, and then, spent 21 years there. So it's been a long road, but it's been great.
Your dad was a firefighter. Anybody else in your family other than your father that kind of led you towards that public service route?
No. And again, growing up, that's not what I wanted to do. I actually didn't want to be in public safety for lots of reasons. But my dad was a fire captain at Cal Poly Fire Department, which is a local university.
Slow?
Yeah, in San Luis Obispo. And so, I got to experience what, from his point of view, what that like shift work was like, having holidays and stuff. So I saw all that at a young age, but it didn't really click that that's what the deal was. And it didn't really impact me like, oh, dad's not home on Christmas. I just was normal that I guess we're going to the fire station on Christmas, right? Because things were very family oriented. So it was not a thing to see my brother and I and my siblings and stuff playing on the fire engines when we were kids, and so growing up, that's not where I was pushed. That's not the direction I was heading. That was my older brother's thing. And, that never happened for him. He went off in a different direction as well. But for me, I wasn't drawn to public safety like that.
What year did you graduate high school?
1994.
And you said you took the ASVABs at 18. Were you in high school when you started going down that path?
No, just after high school. It was like the summer right afterwards. I was sitting up with some friends at 3:00 in the morning, and they were going to take the test, and I had nothing better to do with my day. And so I went and took the test at 8:00 that morning.
Did you have any aspirations for what adulthood was going to be like for you at that point?
I had not past college. I hadn't thought past college yet. I thought maybe I'd go be a music teacher, or I thought, I would do something else. Again, I was always pushed towards academia. My family hadn't been academic though, but I think that's, you always want your kids to do better than you. And again, I was kind of a smart kid. And so everybody kind of pushed me in that direction, but I didn't have, especially during the later high school years when it would have been more formative for me, I didn't have a lot of driving influences. Things were kind of scattered for me, especially family wise and everything else. And so the girl that I dated my last 2 years in high school, her dad was a probation officer. And so you can believe that I had some driving influence there. He knew where I was going, even if I didn't, right?
Yeah.
Especially if I was dating his daughter at the time. So, but he was a great influence as well, and kind of pushed me towards college and that kind of thing. But again, if you can't go to college if you don't pay the bills. And so work was kind of just always a thing that had to be done. So I started going to college while I was working, and I worked my way through college.
Developing this, I'll call it a level of independence at such a young age, did it have any bearing on you, let's call it staying on the straight and narrow? Overall, were you a good kid? You were just very independent and kind of on your own?
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of time to get into trouble. I had an experience when I was in high school, so I didn't drink at the time. It was a fairly bad experience. Somebody else had a bad experience, but I was related to it. And so I didn't, it was an alcohol related death for DUI. And so I didn't drink when I was in high school or college or shortly after. And so I didn't have a lot of time to really go get into like traditional trouble. I was busy working. I was busy trying to go to school. I was busy trying to figure out where I was heading and how I was going to get there.
Sounds like you kind of had your own, I'll call it your own compass bearing, regardless of what the date or age on the calendar said.
Yeah. I mean, part of that was how I was raised. I was raised with role models that, whether my dad was always a great provider, right? Like he was always responsible and dependable. And so I was raised with those characteristics. My grandparents too. My grandfather was the epitome of, the hard worker, right? And so I definitely had those influences growing up, so that when, adversity came my way, like those are the things that you kind of fall back on because that's what's ingrained in you. But
Right.
as you pick a path, right?
Right.
Life is all about choices, and you can make choices one way or the other. And so I just chose to go to work. I chose to go to school. I chose to, keep moving forward as opposed to falling apart. Doesn't mean that there weren't struggles, right?
Tell me it wasn't an actual picture perfect life and everything went just as you planned.
Right. Totally. Right. Yeah. No, but growing up on the Central Coast was still great. I mean, it is a picturesque community.
It's gorgeous.
Expensive to live there, but aside from that, it's a small town. Small towns are mixed blessings. Everybody knows you and you know everybody, but that's both good and bad. But I had a lot of great growing up experiences and opportunities there.
Do me a favor, pull that mic just a little bit closer to you. You mentioned the military. Did you get close to enlisting? And if not, what was the catalyst, or what didn't the military do for you to kind of get you to sign on the dotted line?
At that time, I think there was the drawing down from, the Middle East, the first go around the Middle East.
The cup of coffee war?
Yeah. And so they just really drug their feet. I was heading towards the Navy. But because of my scores, other people called and were interested in everything. And so I kind of just got sidetracked. But 6 months later, I hadn't left yet. I was trying to go in and in the buddy enlistment program kind of thing. And then 6 months later, I hadn't left yet, and other things kept coming up.
Was the Navy your first choice?
Yes.
And what about the Navy drew your attention?
Corpsman, I was interested in corpsman. There's always a special operations community, that kind of thing. But really, it's just, that's where I was heading.
So you had even though you'd say you didn't grow up wanting to be in public service, there sounds like there was a little bit in you that wanted to go towards the medicine route.
That's when I had to pick a career in the military. That's just something that appealed to me.
Got it.
And I think I saw it as, again, I was always pushed towards academia and stuff. So you could climb the ladder there. In the Navy, you can go all the way up to be an MD and that kind of thing. So I think that's part of what was interesting to me for that. And again, that's kind of where my friends were heading too. Everybody else was going that way. So that's where I looked at going as well.
So was it a point where it just kind of went away, or by the time the Navy actually called, you're like, I've found something else?
Yeah, I was busy. Yeah. By the time that they were ready, I had moved on.
And you said you spent a total of 6 years when you started your first responder life was actually on the fire EMS side, correct?
It was. And so actually what happened, we had a really big fire, and I had nothing better to do with my time. And so I'd gone to I was at Cuesta College, doing music and other things. And I had enrolled in the EMT program there, and there was a big fire. And so I went and volunteered my time at the shelter and the Red Cross, and we'd help with it, doing some evacuations and stuff, and knocking on doors and delivering pizzas and just anything to help. And that's where I've kind of just caught, maybe I should, I kind of got consumed by this is a good thing. This is, what I enjoy doing this. I enjoy being a part of what this is. And so that's where my first responder career actually started.
But not enough to keep you on the fire side of the fence.
So yeah, the fire service was great. I was a paid call firefighter and a driver operator, and I worked primarily with what's now CAL FIRE, used to be California Department of Forestry Fire Protection, San Luis Obispo County Fire. And so I spent 6 years with them as well. And I worked for 5 Cities Ambulance at the same time. But 5 Cities Ambulance ended up being my full-time job as an EMT. And then shortly thereafter, paramedic. I went to paramedic school fairly quickly and became a paramedic. And so I was a paramedic and then firefighter, and was kind of doing that. Firefighting wasn't really my thing. I enjoyed firefighting. Structure firefighting was great. Wildland firefighting, not necessarily my thing. And so
completely different beast.
Very much so. And just, it was 5 minutes of fun and 5 hours of salvage and overhauling, cleaning up and things like that. And so I found that EMS was kind of more my calling at that point. And I've always been a paramedic. I was a licensed paramedic up until I worked in the field until 2020. And had nothing to do with COVID. But so I've always worked as a paramedic. And I gave up being in the fire service to go become a police officer, actually. I think I like to be busy. I like to be driven. I like to be busy. And so at that time, EMS was a little slower. And so sitting around on the couch, watching TV, waiting for something bad to happen kind of got boring to me. Do something and master it, then move on, right? Do something and get good at it and find something new to kind of keep stimulating yourself, to keep learning and keep growing. And that's kind of, I think if I looked back at the theme from my childhood, it's always about learning and growing. I used to take apart my toys as a kid because I wanted to know how they worked. My parents hated it, but, and so it's always about learning and getting better and growing. It had nothing to do, it wasn't about me necessarily. It was just about this drive that I have to keep learning. And so on a Friday I got bored, and on Monday I was on the phone with the police academy to try and figure out how I could start that program. Went to the police academy and Graduated from there, got picked up with Aurora Grande Police Department. That was part-time reserve work while I was still a full-time paramedic, and then made the transition when the full-time opportunity was available. Back then, you couldn't really just get hired in San Luis County. You had to either know someone or you had to work your way through the reserve ranks. Now they pay you to go to the academy, but that wasn't a thing when I started. When I started in San Luis County, you had to put yourself through most of the time, except for the two biggest agencies, the Sheriff's Department or maybe even SLO PD. But at that time, even SLO Police Department, San Luis Obispo Police Department, only hired laterals. They didn't hire new hires.
And what year is this we're talking about?
We're talking about 2002. I graduated in the academy in 2000 and got hired in 2002.
So really, you had no other option. If you wanted to do law enforcement in San Luis Obispo County, to start out, you had to put yourself through the academy.
For the most part, yeah. That's kind of how it worked. And so I went to a night academy too, because I worked. I was employed full-time in public safety from the time I was 19 years old. So even going to college, I was a paramedic or an EMT or even a cop while I was in school. Going to Cal Poly and being a police officer at the same time was challenging. But yeah, and so that was the option. And so I went to the night academy. I worked full time and tried to arrange my schedule. And it was a 3-semester academy, so it was a year and a half in a law enforcement academy on 2 nights a week and a Saturday.
Was it run by the college or run by the Sheriff's Department?
Run by the college. Yeah. Allen Hancock College had a police academy. I was class 76. They're still going strong. I work there now part-time, but yeah, it's a great program. And so at that time they offered a nighttime modular format for people like me who were working, but wanted to make the transition into law enforcement.
And how long were you reserved before they gave you the opportunity to go full-time?
Just a year and a half. Yeah, I went full-time in April of 2004. So hired in 2002, 2004.
And once you had the opportunity to compare full-time work, was law enforcement everything you thought you wanted out of the first responder world?
Yes. Yeah, I went from being reactive to being proactive. And I think that's what the drive was. Again, I don't like sitting around. And so as much as being a paramedic or a firefighter was great because you responded to emergencies and people in their worst days and got to help. Being a police officer, you got to try and prevent a lot of that from happening. You tried to catch the DUI drivers. You tried to prevent bad things from happening. Or if you were responding, 9 times out of 10, you could get there way faster than a fire engine or an ambulance could.
Were you anticipating? Take one quick step back. How big of an agency was Aurora Grande?
Aurora Grande is in the 5 cities area, so it's about 26 sworn. There's 3 agencies in that area, all about the same size. We're 5.4 square miles, and each agency down there, Pismo Beach Police Department, Grover Beach Police Department, and Aurora Grande Police Department are about the same size, all in the mid-20s, and all about the same demographics. And the only difference is Pismo gets a lot of vacation, a lot of out-of-town people coming in during the summer.
Well, they're right on the water.
Yeah, well, it's gorgeous. Yeah.
For you, was staying at Aurora Grande your long-term plan, or were you thinking a bigger organization at some point?
I had looked at different larger agencies, even just in our county, San Luis Obispo Police Department, et cetera. But I never managed to go anywhere. I always just kind of stayed there. I looked out once or twice when I was looking to try and get into administration. I did test out a couple of times. But in general, I just always stayed at AG.
You promoted eventually to sergeant, correct?
Yes.
How many years in?
I was promoted to sergeant 7 years in.
And in correlation with that, did that limit the responsibilities or the duties that you could do at that point in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I had the typical police officer responsibilities throughout my career. So I was on the range staff fairly early. I was a field training officer and all of that. And then when I started to get into, I was a senior officer. So I was a police officer for 3 years. And then I was a senior officer for several years after that before I became a sergeant in 2012. And when you become a sergeant, of course, yeah, it pigeonholes you a little bit because you don't have the diversity of assignments. You have sergeant, you have detective sergeant, and that's about it. And so I spent 12 years as a sergeant. The last 4 were in detectives.
Where I was going with that, even though I worked for a little bit bigger agency, about double the size, three quarters more, whatever, 75. It was pretty much the same. If you promoted early in your career, all of a sudden you're a sergeant. You're like, okay, I can be patrol sergeant or DBs. I take that back. We did have a traffic sergeant, but it's one of those things. It's that balancing act of challenging yourself to move up, but at the same token, and I understand some of the people who kind of say, hey, I don't want to promote because I want to keep my opportunities open. So it's that teeter-totter balance.
Yes. And for me, it was, again, that wanting to learn. So every 3 to 5 years, I wanted to do something different or something new, whether it was just a collateral assignment, which we had a ton of, or and when promotion opportunities came. And so when those promotional opportunities came, especially in a small agency, it was hard to not take them because they didn't come along that often. And we didn't have a lot of specialty assignments, being smaller, but we had a couple, and, those got wrapped up for 3 to 4 years. And so you kind of had choices to make. And so for me, when the promotional opportunities came, not only was I pushed in that direction, but those are the opportunities I took. Because also you want to try and make an impact, right? If the goal is to get better or to make things better, you want to try and help that process along. And the more influence you have, the more you can help move the change process along.
Rio Grande, one of those agencies where people get hired and don't leave?
It was for a long time. Yeah. When I first got hired there, we'd had one person leave in like the first 3 to 5 years I was there. It was where people came and stayed. They didn't leave very often. Turnover, we're the victims of turnover like everybody now, but back then that was not the case.
Well, and probably driven by the fact that to get on that agency, you had to put yourself through the academy. So there was to a degree, maybe a little bit more investment in, hey, let me get myself established, as opposed to just kind of bouncing around. But I don't know the mentality of it. I just know that tends to be how many small agencies are. People get hired and they're there.
Yeah, I think part of it was putting yourself through the academy, but more was how to get hired there. A lot of times you had to either be a reserve and work your way up. So it was kind of the place you grew up, or if you lateraled in from another agency, usually when you lateral in, if the grass is greener, that's where you stay. And so we had a lot of people come to our agency and not leave.
Any reservations about being a cop in basically your backyard where you grew up?
I didn't want to work where I lived. And so I didn't want to be up in North County in Tascadero. I liked being in Arroyo Grande. Interestingly enough, that's where I started my EMS career as well. And so even though I live in Atascadero, which is about 30 minutes north, at that time, I'd always worked in the city of Arroyo Grande, or the 5 cities community. And so it was kind of a natural transition to go from the ambulance into the police department there, but I never lived there until recently because I never wanted to live where I worked.
You eventually made and it's a multi-agency SWAT team, correct?
It is. So we had two SWAT teams in our area. We have a regional SWAT team, which is all of the cities save one. And then the sheriff's department has their own SWAT team as well.
How early into your career did you get onto SWAT?
Not as early as I would have liked, about 7 years in.
Did promoting to sergeant, did that force you to come off, or were you able to stay on?
No, actually, I made it on the SWAT team and promoted to sergeant at the exact same time. Almost exactly the same time.
Dual congratulations.
Yeah, within weeks of each other.
Who's the command staff for that agent or for that SWAT team?
So it rotates, and that's what's interesting. And so our team administration rotates through. So we had everybody, let's see, when I first started, there was a commander from Pismo Beach Police Department, and then some lieutenants and stuff from SLO Police Department. And then we had a lieutenant from Paso that took over, and then back to San Luis, and 2 of the captains there had taken over the team. And so it rotated every couple of years.
On a set schedule?
No, I think it had a lot to do with promotions and job opportunities and tenure. And sometimes people just going, yeah, I've done this for a long time now. We need to give some other people opportunity. And we tried to grow people up through the ranks for the SWAT administration, because you can imagine the learning curve there. And so we were very fortunate to have some great experienced team commanders that came up through the SWAT ranks, of course, and through our team that took over running the team. But we had different points of view. So at one point, Pismo Beach was kind of in charge of the SWAT team, and then Paso, and then San Luis, but it was never run that way. You never went, oh, well, Pismo's in charge of the SWAT team now. It's, we had 2 or 3 guys that were running the SWAT team from the administration from different agencies. So you always had the best people from all the different agencies. And that was the best part about having a regional SWAT team. It had its challenges, but in general, you had the best players from all of the agencies. So everybody brought their best players, everybody brought their best toys. And so while we were still limited, like everybody is in those areas with special operations, you had a big pool to draw from.
To your knowledge, I mean, obviously you can speak for Arroyo Grande, but the other agencies, to move into a command position of the SWAT team, did you as an operator have to have been a member of the SWAT team previously?
Typically, I would say not always, but typically that's how it worked. Every once in a while, you'd have somebody that had tactical experience from another agency. one of the assistant team commanders right now was somebody who had tactical experience from a previous agency, but is now in the administration of the SWAT team because he had enough experience that he brought to the table. But in general, the guys that are on the administration for our SWAT team, for the regional team, are all people that came up through our SWAT team.
And how big was the team total?
We had 11 agencies. And so, it fluctuated greatly depending on contribution and budgets and schedules. So we had, 20, 22, 24 people. Maybe we were as lean as 16 at one point.
But it's always a collateral assignment, at least for your agency?
All of the agencies, even the sheriff's department, all of us are too small. And so there are no full-time staff for any of the SWAT responsibilities, regardless of what agency you're from.
So leading into the incident that we're going to get into, 2020, if I remember correctly, there was a person who shot a slow officer or slow deputy?
So it started off before that, but it was a San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office deputy. And so the suspect had stolen some guns from an attorney's office through an unlocked window and an unlocked desk drawer. He went, I believe, down to one of the bars in Paso Robles and had some issue there. And when he left, he decided to fire rounds at the police station. So we're getting calls of the police station being shot at from some unknown assailant. And so as the responders started responding to that location, he started shooting at the responders that were arriving. And so one of the sheriff's deputies was shot in the face as he was exiting his patrol car. And it was a 70-yard hail of gunfire kind of thing. It wasn't precision by any means, but he survived and is doing okay now. But that was the intro to this whole mess, was that response and that incident happening.
And what time period are we talking about again?
This was June 10th at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning.
And prior to this incident, was he known in the Valley to have been a prior problem?
No, he came to the Central Coast. He had had some problems up in the Monterey Bay area is what I had been briefed on. And then before that, he had moved up the coast. He was from the Valley area, not from our area, but he had had problems kind of other places, but nothing locally. He wasn't a known quantity to us or anybody in our area. We had to figure out who he was from scratch.
How long, to your knowledge, did it take for them to figure out who the actual shooter was? About
midday the first day. They figured out who this guy was, who we were looking for. So when we all got up there and got called, SWAT takes forever to get anywhere. By the time we all got there and got suited up, it was about 6 a.m. or so. We had to clear the entire downtown area. So we split it in half, our team and the sheriff's department team. And it took us about, 4 hours or so. I mean, it was 5 hours. It was close to noon before we were done. And we didn't locate the suspect. And so that kicked off like almost a day and a half manhunt looking for him.
No, they spin you up full, like 24/7 at that point?
So we were there for a while, and then we started to break into shifts, right? And so the sheriff's department team stayed, and they called in other resources. I think Kings County maybe showed up, and a couple of other SWAT teams came. The FBI SWAT team had showed up eventually, and they broke us into kind of shifts. So we were sent home to sleep while they stayed on, and the sheriff's department and a couple other teams stayed on through the night, using thermal imaging and everything else, trying to locate the suspect. He had been sighted, and he would shoot and then run away and then shoot and run away. So we'd get these shots fired calls, and we'd go where he would shoot at somebody and then run off. And so they tracked him from different points. He had executed a homeless man on the train tracks during the initial incident, and then worked his way down the train tracks to an apartment complex. And then the FBI had to go clear that apartment complex. Then he was seen at a gas station. And then as he was going into the riverbed, he had shot towards a sheriff's deputy while they were looking around for him there. And then he disappeared into the riverbed. And so that's when we were called the second time at about 4 or 5 o'clock the next morning. We were called back in, and then everybody else was sent home to sleep while we were there. And they had a perimeter established, and we were set up as a quick reaction force. There were 2 Bearcats, each with an entry team or, a contact team on it. I was on one. I was a team leader on one team, and then one of the team leaders on the other team. And we just kind of split the areas, and, we responded to reports of shots fired, which most of the time turned out to be nothing, or shots heard. We responded to a report of a guy that looked similar to the suspect. And so we just kind of drove around in the morning, making these different contacts, looking for suspect, not an active manhunt, but just responding while we tried to bring in more resources because the riverbed area that was contained was fairly large.
That's what I was going to go with. The containment that they had set up, was it the typical adage with law enforcement, start big and then work your way in? Were they setting the wide perimeter at that point and just trying to hold it before they actually started doing active searches within that perimeter?
Yes, it was a manpower related thing. We didn't have enough people yet. And so we had just sent most of our manpower home to sleep. And so, because they'd already been on for almost a 24-hour operational cycle. So we were trying to get them out. We were replaced. We were called back in the next morning to take over. And so there was no active looking per se. It was more just contain the problem and respond to small incidents along the way while we're trying to come up with a plan to figure out how to locate the subject.
And when was it decided to actually, and if I'm understanding correctly, all right, we've now got a general area where we think he's at within this perimeter. Let's start actively searching for him?
More or less. And so the last assignment we had after lunch was to escort the FBI's team into a scene to get some evidence. They were going to go in and do an evidence collection. And so my team was tasked with entering the riverbed to go to like a campsite, I guess, where the suspect had been. He had a journal and some other stuff there. So we escorted the FBI team in. And while we were there, we had contacted a homeless man in the
unhoused.
Unhoused, thank you. In the riverbed area, who said he had just seen
from
him.
Your area and my area, it was a transient.
Well, that's the terminology I was trying to use. But yeah, we contacted a transient man known as the Prophet, and he's like, I just saw him like 2 hours ago, and he was 2 miles down here. I can show you where we saw him. And so we had talked to the command staff and said, well, we're here to look for the guy, and this is a credible witness that said he was here just a little bit ago, and there was a building this guy was describing like an outbuilding. And so why not go check it out, right? I mean, that's what we're there for. Even as a quick reaction, like we're still kind of looking for the guy. And so we divided the team in half. Half escorted the transient to where he thought he saw the suspect. And then my team provided cover because it was about a 50-foot or so embankment with, camps along the top. And so we paralleled the other team, clearing the camps along the way to make sure that nothing happened to them while they were in a less advantageous position.
So it wasn't just simply a 2-mile hump to that outbuilding. There were other camps that you had to get through to get to that building.
Well, we didn't know that at the time. Oh. So they were, the team with the reporting party was walking through the riverbed, and we were up on an embankment next to the train tracks, basically. And as we were paralleling them along the train tracks, because the Bearcat that we were in couldn't get down, it was a 50-foot or so drop. So we drove along the top, and we just kept encountering these camps along the way. So we took the time to clear them real quick so we didn't have any issues.
Any hindsight, any air assets that you could have just gotten above it? Or did you have it?
Oh, yeah. We had a helicopter up and everything. In hindsight, there's 100 things you do differently,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
I wouldn't have split my team. I would have brought the other team in. There's a lot of things I would have done differently, of course. But I had a 7-man team up with me, and there was the 3 operators that were down with the reporting party. So, I had a driver, and I had a turret guy, and there was a canine and less lethal. I mean, we had tools and we had all the right personnel. We just didn't have enough of the right personnel. And so clearing those camps with, 4 guys the camps weren't big, but it's still sketchy.
But not so, I'll call it remote enough that the Bearcat couldn't get through there?
Well, no, we just drove right along the train tracks.
Oh, okay.
And so the bluff ran right along the train tracks, and the team that was escorting the witness, for lack of a better description, was walking right below that 50-foot or so embankment or 100-foot embankment where they were down in the riverbed. And so again, we were just paralleling them all the way down, trying to make sure that nobody was up in those camps that were going to, put them in a bad position.
Did you end up making it to that outbuilding?
No. So about 3 or 4 camps in, we had just finished clearing all those camps. We were about halfway there or so when we get a call from the command post that we needed to return because they had a plan. So it was about 2:10 in the afternoon, and we got a call that we needed to be back by 2:30 for a briefing because all the teams were coming back in, and they'd come up with this big plan to try and locate this guy down in the riverbed. And so we were basically told to finish whatever you're doing and get back in 20 minutes. And it was about a 10-minute drive. So it was like, we got to go pick up the other team and let's get back to what we're doing.
Stupid question, giving up that real estate You had to take it all back again, right?
We would have. Yeah, had things gone the other way, they had a plan, and so we probably would have had to research all of that stuff. I'm not privy to exactly what the plan was because we never got that far.
Yeah. Again, hindsight's 2020.
Sure. Yeah. And so actually we were just getting ready to leave. I had been talking to the guys that I'd been searching with, and we had we were joking a little bit about, well, we just wasted all this time and whatever. We know he's not here, but we're going to leave.
Yeah, not like let's hold it here and let everybody come to us and then formulate the plan moving forward.
Yeah, they had multiple teams. They probably had 3 SWAT teams and plus a bunch of other assets. So they had a big plan. I just didn't know about it yet. And so I'd radioed the other team, hey, we're going to come pick you up. And just as we were getting ready to leave, the turret guy noticed near a tree that there was something blue on the ground. He thought it was like a glove. It ended up being a pair of like underwear or something, like transient underwear. But the thought was, well, we probably should check the tree before we leave because you don't want somebody behind us. Like you check, unfortunately, it was like checking the trunk or checking under the bed, right? It's the last thing you're thinking, well, we should just check this before we leave real quick.
Yeah.
And that's where he ended up being. He was in the tree, and he started shooting at us, and then we shot at him, and it was a big mess.
Did he the weapons that he had were just simply the ones that he had originally stolen, or did he had amassed others?
No, he only had a 40 caliber handgun and a 38 caliber handgun.
And those were the ones he had originally stolen in Paso?
In San Luis Obispo.
San Luis Obispo.
Yeah, from the lawyer's office, yes.
You ultimately ended up taking a round.
Yeah, so as I was approaching the tree from one side and my partners were on the other side, I'd cleared the Bearcat and was walking towards the tree, staring right at the tree. That's when the gunfire started. So the first round went off. We actually had thought maybe one of us had tripped or, because there's unsteady footing on all the rocks next to the train tracks. And with ear pro on, it just sounded like a pop. And so we thought maybe somebody had an ND or something. So I looked at them and it wasn't them and it wasn't me. And so then I looked back at the tree and I looked at a different tree farther down, and then the second round off and caught me in the leg. And so at that point I'd been shot. And then as I'm running back to the Bearcat, limping back to the Bearcat, the turret guy had mentioned that there had been a third round, and I had heard a third round, and you can hear it in the video. So the third round had gone off.
And were you the only one struck?
I was at that point.
And then how did it progress from there both ways? One, how bad was your injury, and were you immediately out of the game? And then where did it progress from there?
So from there, so I was shot through and through on my right lower leg. I was able to put a tourniquet on it initially anyway and evaluate it later. And we had things to do. So we started shooting back, and we had, people the canine was over at his vehicle. He wasn't where the armor was. And so we had to get him over. So there was some suppressive fire. And then we realized he's got elevation, he's got cover and concealment, and he's got high ground because he's, we could assault the tree, but that doesn't make sense. He's basically a barricade. So why not bring in our resources? And so when we all got in the Bearcat, because we weren't 100% sure which tree he was at this point because he was hiding, the guys I was with said that they thought they saw the flash from the tree the guy was hiding in. I hadn't seen that. So we thought he was in this tree. And in our minds, it was he's either in this tree or he's somewhere else, and we need to figure this out. So we have a time thing that, the longer we wait, the worse it gets. We weren't wanting to rush anything, but we wanted a good solid plan. And so the decision was made to pick up the guys from the other part of our team, come back and address this like a barricade. And they were only like 50 yards down the way. So it's not like we were going very far. We were going to drive down, put them in, drive back and treat it like a barricade. We brought in the other team on top to try and contain it. We had the helicopter overhead.
Was helicopter hitting any FLIR with that?
No.
Or getting any signatures?
No, this was daytime. Yeah, this was right in the middle of the day. This was 2:10, 2:15 in the afternoon.
And in June, you're probably talking 95, maybe even close to 100?
102, 103 degrees. It's a little warm, which led to its own issues, and so, that was the plan. The plan was to try and address it like a barricade. And so went down to pick up the other guys. And everything that went wrong could go wrong, right? You couldn't get out on the radio because there was too many people talking on the radio. Self-deployment was a problem. Communication was a problem. It got so bad at some point I had to pick up my phone and call the command post on the phone because I couldn't get out on the radio. And so I ended up talking to the command post saying, hey, I'm hurt. Here's what's going on. I'm not really operational anymore, but I can hang out in the passenger seat and get this done. It's just, it's a through and through to my right lower leg. I've medically treated it. It's fine. And they trusted me enough to make that decision because of what we were dealing with. And I told them the plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And I had their blessing to do that at that point. There were other assets that had self-deployed. And so
that never happens.
Right. The things that goes wrong on every major incident that you think about, right? Communications and self-deployment. We had the same problem because it was so big and there were so many people involved. And once the radio traffic went out that the shooting had started, everybody wanted to participate, and not in the shooting, but I mean, genuinely people wanted to help, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't crazy, or it wasn't like the Wild West. Everybody really wanted to help, but some people were just kind of on their own sheet of music or operating under their own thing. And so there was no coordination. It was kind of a big mess. And then, so as I picked up the other people and kind of came back to the tree, we're getting ready to come back to the tree.
Just real quick, for my clarification, you're on-scene commander for that team and
yes.
And then as far as when you said radio traffic, does the SWAT team have its own channel, or are you operating on one channel for everybody?
We were on Passo's channel, and everybody on the incident was on that channel. That was basically our tactical channel because the line of sight thing, given the topography, was poor. And so we had to switch to a radio channel that worked for everybody.
Got it.
So yeah, it wasn't encrypted. Everybody could hear it. And the gunfire was loud enough that people noticed what was going on. People definitely heard what was happening. So we went and picked up the other 3 guys from my team. And as they were getting in, a truck shows up with 2 guys in it from another team saying, "Hey, we're here to rescue you." And what do you mean? Like, get in, like, you want to come, let's go. And they're like, "No, you need to leave." And it was this huge mess. And it's like, okay, well, hang on. Then there was no real transfer of power or anything. There was no briefing. There was no anything. It was get out, get in, and this whole mess. And so I ended up in a truck on my way to an ambulance while the people that took over tried to figure out even what tree we were talking about. And all the guys in the armor are like, "It's tree down there next to the canine vehicle. It's right here." And it's this whole big thing. So I ended up in a truck on my way to an ambulance while the rest of the event unfolded. And it turned into quite the ordeal, 2 hours later, and some friendly fire incidents and some other stuff that had occurred, which is really unfortunate.
But ultimately, you still were the only one hurt?
So there were 2 friendly fire incidents afterwards. So they went back and treated the tree like a barricade. About an hour and a half or so in, the guy went up and over the embankment and came down into a vineyard area. And so there was a SWAT team and a whole bunch of people that self-deployed.
There's vineyards up there?
Yeah, right. No, Paso Robles doesn't have any vineyards at all, right? And so there was, the topography had layers or shelves, for lack of a better description. And so one team that was on like one side couldn't see people on the other side, and the air assets didn't catch it. And the command post had told them to be somewhere else, and they weren't where they were supposed to be. And so when the second round of shooting started, the rounds from the people shooting went down. I'm not sure what the technical term is for it, but it went down and all over the place, and it hit another piece of armor, and the 223 rounds had fragmented, and one went into the vest of a CHP officer, and the other one went into the knee of a Kings County Sheriff's SWAT deputy. And so, minor injuries, but definitely still injuries, friendly fire injuries.
Right.
There were rounds that ended up in buildings nearby, and it turned into a thing.
Besides stealing the guns, had he also actually stole ammunition too?
There was ammo with the guns, and then it seems like he ended up with other ammunition, and I never got an answer as to where that may have come from. Did he steal it from a store or something? I don't know.
Ultimately, he ended up no longer with us. You ended up at the hospital.
Yes. So I ended up at the hospital first, and then that happened. That unfolded as he went over. They gave him the command to stop, and he didn't stop, and he turned, and that was the end of that. And so, but then there was the aftermath to deal with it.
For you though, personally, you're now at the hospital. You've got a through and through on the leg. Are you feeling at that moment like, I'll just bandage me up and I'm good? Or could you kind of tell, maybe there is something more to this?
Oh no, I was ready to go back. Like you couldn't keep me away. I was, much to my boss's regret. He tried. But part of that's the mentality though, like, oh, just go home. Well, you can't just go home. Like you just involved this major thing. All the people that you were with were all there still. And they just wanted you to go home and the debriefing and the investigation. And, that's not how most of us are built. And so it was get bandaged up at the hospital, get your antibiotics, get your x-ray, whatever. Here's your crutches. Thank you very much. Go home, change clothes because the clothes I was wearing were shot to shit, and, head back to what was happening there.
So then moving forward from that, walk me through, because you're how many years into your career at this point?
I was 18 years into my career.
What powers you through your day? If you're like me, coffee's at the top of that list. So take your coffee to a new level with Trident Coffee, a veteran-owned brand that's redefining your coffee experience. Cold brew experts, their instant cold brew is a game changer. And though they roast their beans to excel as a cold brew, trust me, their coffee tastes just as amazing hot. Trident Coffee is also committed to your wellness, with ingredients like organic mushrooms, adaptogens, and nootropics to help boost your focus and support your immunity. It's made for those who enjoy good coffee and value quality and health. Whether you're looking for that perfect, refreshing cold brew or a smooth cup of hot coffee to fuel your day, Trident Coffee has you covered. Head over to tridentcoffee.com and use the promo code TDP15 for 15% off your order. That's TDP15 for 15% off your order. Walk me through what comes after that, and because you don't just heal up and go back to work.
Yeah, as much as I tried. And so I think the issues were less physical and more mental, of course, when it comes to things like that. A lot of the, if you want to call it post-traumatic stress, which is common for incidents like that, didn't come from the actual shooting itself. It came from all the baloney that happened afterwards, right? A lot of the second guessing and a lot of the finger pointing and a lot of the agency politics or interagency politics. By Monday, this was on a Friday. It was a Thursday when the shooting happened. By Monday, things were a huge mess, to the point where people are calling each other going, hey, did we do something wrong? What happened? It was over the weekend. There was a lot of emotional stress that came along with that whole thing.
Of the 10 guys, including yourself, on that original deployment, was it heavy to one agency, or was it an even mix of all the agencies that are represented on that multi-agency SWAT team?
On my team, there was multiple agencies. Yeah, no, there were multiple agencies. There was one guy from my agency. There was, two guys.
Besides you.
One, myself, another guy from AG. There was a guy from Pismo. There was a guy or two from San Luis. There was some Paso. There was state parks. Like we had several people on my team, and that was typical of the makeup of the regional team.
But you talk about something that, like it or not, it's inevitable to happen when you're dealing with a multi-agency team, is that somebody's going to have a differing opinion from a Monday morning quarterback seat. Like it or not, that's just something that's going to happen.
Yeah, and it wasn't just from the teams. It was not only from our teams or our agencies, but it was from outside agencies and outside teams and stuff too. It was wild to watch it unfold, and nobody. And of course, now you're ordered not to talk about it. Nobody could talk or was supposed to talk about it. And it's just like, well, what's going on, and why are we being treated like we did something wrong necessarily? And if so, why isn't that being communicated? And so it was kind of this whole thing. And it went on for a long time.
From the onset, were you supported by administration from your organization, or were you kind of fighting, I'll call it, multiple fronts?
Initially, I was supported by my agency. I was supported by my chief, and then he left shortly after. So this was in June, and he retired beginning of August. But I definitely was supported initially by my agency. My chief took great care of me initially.
Dealing with the mental side of things, as you kind of referred to it as the PTS, when did those, I'll call them symptoms, start setting in for you?
So I didn't have any for a long time. I mean, there was the typical stress, but we deal with finger pointing and Monday morning quarterbacking and law enforcement all the time, which is one of the toxic traits of our profession, right? And so we dealt with it the best we can. Being a team leader, I met with my guys like, hey, how you doing? What's going on with you? And just communicated. We weren't allowed to talk about the incident. Okay, fine. We won't talk about the incident, but it was, how are you? What's going on? What do you need? Whatever, that kind of thing. And so you met with people and supported each other and that kind of thing. I didn't have any issues until about October. So from June to October, and maybe it was building cumulative, but I didn't have any real PTS symptoms or anything until October. And then late October, I had suicidal nightmares that started. Because the stress of everybody, like, well, maybe we did something wrong, maybe this, maybe that. And then, so that was the first major red flag.
Even though you were directed not to talk about it, when you were together collectively as a team, did you feel like it was a cohesive unit, or could you sense any type of fractions or I'll call them groupings, like, oh, kind of those guys are thinking this way though? Are you feeling it? Is there anything overt?
No, not within our team. Our team was very cohesive. We'd had a critical incident stress debriefing, not an actual tactical debriefing at that point because we couldn't talk about it. But,
right.
We got together and had one of those, and people looked out for each other, and, we had lots of, meetings and that kind of stuff. But there was no feeling of second guessing from inside our team. It all came from the outside.
So by October, you're starting to now experience nightmares. Anything else that's kind of impacting you?
That was the major thing. There probably was other stuff, but, nothing that the typical job doesn't come with either. So, or that you just manage, right? You learn to step up and manage whatever happens to be coming your way. So I didn't notice anything, I didn't notice anything like having a short fuse. I didn't notice anything like, and no one had told me. And I'd talked to several people like, hey, if you see any of these things, can you let me know from the outside? And so, I had the nightmare once and I was like, okay, that's a problem. And then I had it a second time, like within a week. And then I was like, I need to go talk to somebody, and so I went straight to my boss and went, hey, this happened. I need to talk to somebody.
And how did it go from there?
Not well. It had been 4 weeks before even I was contacted back, not by my agency, but by other entities. And then at least, more weeks after that before work comp tried to send me to talk to somebody. But by then, you're 6-8 weeks down the road having suicidal nightmares. So I was smart enough to go talk to somebody on my own. It didn't go well.
And I'll preface this by saying, present it any way that you are comfortable and what you can talk about. But when you talk about, you went to your boss and said, hey, I'm struggling, and then it's 4 weeks. Is it 4 weeks because your agency wasn't taking it seriously, the city wasn't taking it seriously, or a combination of both?
It wasn't my agency at that point. My agency immediately said, go talk to HR, get work comp to send you to somebody. Like, we know you need help.
Got it.
But, nobody in our area had really ever dealt with anything like this before. So this is one of the largest incidents we've ever had in San Luis Obispo County.
So figuratively speaking, it's like blowing the dust off the manual. Like, how do we deal with this?
Right. Where we don't even have a manual for dealing with this yet.
Got
like
it.
Wellness wasn't even a thing yet. Right. And peer support wasn't a thing yet, or it was just starting in some of the bigger agencies. Our agency didn't have any infrastructure for this. So it was be sent to HR, have HR contact work comp because HR didn't know how to deal with it. And that's where it got, forgotten about. I literally got an email that said, oh, we forgot.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so then it was 2 weeks later that work comp tried to send me to somebody. They tried to send me to a child psychologist. And kind of the running joke is, I know cops act like kids, but this psychologist they wanted to send me to specialized in kids going through divorces. And, again, while cops act like kids, wildly inappropriate, right? When we talk about things today, we talk about cultural competency. Well, that, was just becoming a thing then. It wasn't a thing yet back in 2020, especially in our area. And work comp's response was, well, we don't have anybody in your area that you can talk to. Like, I'm willing to drive. Zoom's a thing now, post-COVID, right? And so I ended up seeing a law enforcement psychologist on my own who had retired from this LA Sheriff's Department, who worked in our area for a bit, who's now retired. But I went on my own dime for, 6 months to try and, make sure that I was okay, to make sure I got the help that I needed to deal with whatever PTS was going on.
In a weird way, if there was already somebody that you found operating in your area and HR can't seem to find them, was it something where you could have just said, hey, what about if I go see this person?
No, I did. And that person was known because a lot of us went to see this person right after the shooting. But it was an issue between work comp and them and that kind of thing.
Are you a provider? Are you in the network?
Right.
All of that. So then walk me through the journey out of that, or through it and then out of it.
So yeah, the PTS thing, that was fairly straightforward. I got I talked about like the nightmares and where that stuff came from and tried to, figure out why I was having that, because that's really the only issue I was having and a suicidal nightmares is a significant issue. Right. And so we're trying to figure out what that's all about, but there wasn't a whole lot of other stuff going on. In the meantime, I was on light duty still because I was trying to get my injury taken care of. The gunshot to my right leg had severed a nerve. And so I was having issues with running. Every time I put my foot down, I was having shooting nerve pain and numbness and all kinds of stuff. And they kept sending me to PT, and not to a neurologist, but just to PT. Right. And I kept getting
more stretching.
Right. I just kept getting the runaround. It was, a year of all of that. So literally a year of all that. Then they sent me to the qualified medical examiner, and who was an ortho guy who's, muscle and bones, has nothing to do with nerves. And his thing was, you haven't seen a neurologist yet. And I'm just begging for my injury to be fixed. Like, all I want is to go back to work. I'm at work, I'm on light duty. I'm still in detectives doing my detective gig. I can't run, but I can do everything else. And so like, I'm still, teaching at the range and running the range program, and I'm supervising detectives and doing all the things, going to counseling for, the nightmares, and getting the runaround from work comp basically. And I'm asking for help, and I'm not getting it.
Was the issue only running in the sense of trying to plant and push off?
Yeah.
Or what about walking?
Walking was okay. If you wanted to do like a pain scale on like a 10, maybe walking was a 1 or a 2. So it was just an inconvenience. But every time, I tried to run it all, you're looking at between 8 and 10. If you've ever had, like a shooting nerve pain, it was intense. It was more intense than it should have been. But, and all I wanted was it fixed. Like, I was at work. I wanted to be at work. And I'm just getting the runaround.
Did the second doctor and they always ask that rhetorical question, well, have you seen? You know what, Doc, if I had, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you. But yeah. Was he able to push through and actually get you to the right person?
Yeah, he was great. He wrote a rather scathing letter to workers' comp. And I was immediately sent to a neurologist who did some testing and verified the injury and was like, well, you only have really 2 options here. And, and you can, if you can not have surgery, or you can have surgery. And because if you're going to have surgery, you need to go somewhere like Stanford, that has a peripheral, neurosurgery program. And so that's where I landed eventually. But that was a year and a half, 2 years later. It was by the time I made it to Stanford, it was, I don't remember if it was fall of 2021 or early 2022. It was a while later. And it wasn't even until I think it was November of I'm trying to remember when I had surgery now. It was either 2021 or 2022 when I finally had surgery. It was long enough afterwards that the surgeon goes, yeah, if you'd come to see me right away, I probably could have fixed something, but I'll do the best I can.
That was definitely going to be one of my follow-up questions. And you hate asking it, but it's that, man, if somebody would have just been on the ball from the get-go and addressed it earlier on, maybe not all of it would have gone away, but could they have addressed a greater majority of it?
Or at least in a timely fashion, right? Try to get it done in a timely fashion. And so, yeah, I think it was in fall of 2022 that I finally had surgery. And he's like, yeah, I couldn't fix it. He's like, I tried to do this and I tried to do that, and this is what ended up. And so he solved one problem, but it created another problem. And so I still have the nerve pain and the nerve injury and everything. It's not when I put my foot down anymore, but every time you touch the back of my leg at all, like right now sitting in this chair, even just hitting the back of my leg on your chair still causes that same intense pain and numbness. And so getting in and out of a car, and so his answer is, well, I can do the same surgery higher and see if we can get a better result. And at that point, I went to my bosses in the city and was like, well, what are we going to do here? Like, it's going to be a year before this heals up to see if it's going to be any worse or better. And, and I got no response at that point. It was months where I wasn't getting any communication from the police department. I wasn't getting any communication from HR.
But they're still allowing you to be quote unquote on light duty work in the DB?
Oh, no. So I was on light duty for a year. And then I was pulled off of light duty in August of 2021. So a little after a year later, I was told that it was a liability to have me at work because I had an injury. And so I was put on 4850 time. And I told them the same thing then that I said the year before, like, I just need help. Like, I need to get help. I need to get my injury fixed. Like, I want to be at work. So I was put off of work. I was told on Monday that Wednesday would be my last day at work.
And then how long after that was your actual surgery?
A year later.
A year later. And you're basically just sitting at home kind of stewing in all this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was a rather sudden change that was very unexpected. And it was something else.
Let's go back to May 2020. In your mind, how much longer were you going on your career?
Oh, gosh, I had 12, 13, 14 years still. You know, I'm 3 at 50, but I started at 29 years old. So I'm going till 55 at least, you know. So at that time I had, 12 years left.
You're now, I'm kind of following along, you're about 2 years removed before you have the surgery. It's about the 2-year mark from the shooting.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, you've been sitting at home now for a year. Where's your headspace as far as your long-term view of your career in the job? Were you still thinking like, man, I just want to get back to work? Or were you starting to kind of open that door of, let me just get out of this?
So even today, I want to go back to work. Like there wasn't a time where I wanted out, agency politics and all that stuff aside. I liked my job. I wanted to be at work, and I fought to be at work. I asked for help. I tried. The only thing I didn't do, which I should have done, was I should have gotten a lawyer, and like I tried to explain to the city manager at one point, who was a lawyer, like I didn't think I needed a lawyer. Like I got hurt at work. It wasn't like I fell out of a chair, and all I wanted was help getting my injury fixed so I could come back to work. I was at work working, I didn't want to be off work. I didn't ask to be off work. And every time I was being sent to PT by workers' comp, and I couldn't get any help from the police department or from HR to push workers' comp to do anything differently, and so aside from getting a lawyer, which is probably what I should have done, I just wanted back to work. And so I was initially kind of lost for a couple of weeks, right? Like just floored, and it wasn't a pleasant experience by any stretch of the imagination. It didn't help anything, didn't help mental health or anything. And then, I figured, well, I'm still stuck here. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm on 4850 time, so I'm being paid. So, instead of doing what most people do on 4850 and take vacations and whatever, I went to school. I finished my master's degree. I went off and did the postmaster instructor program. And so I used my time, and tried to continue, developing myself. My master's degree is in organizational leadership, thinking that, that's the next step logically in my career anyway. And then the postmaster instructor program, to be a better teacher. I've taught since I was 19 years old at the community college, both in EMS and then later in law enforcement, to try and just, build myself up. It's always learning and always getting better and always wanting to progress. Right. And so I didn't waste my time. I used my time relatively productively.
So I've had a former guest who was also a cop up in that same area, didn't get shot, ended up getting in a foot pursuit, jacked up his knee. And then through that surgery discovered that he had a condition where he got blood clots and had to go on blood pressure medication. But when he came to the same way you were, in the sense they had him on light duty, they were trying to figure out something. But then when you start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, he goes, you unfortunately have to come to that realization that your agency may be behind you 100%, but at some point you become a line item on the city's budget. And so where I'm going with this is when they pulled you off of light duty working your DB spot and said, hey, you're off. You're going to 40-56 time or whatever. Was it your feeling, actual knowledge? Was your agency still supporting you? And this was just simply the city's decision? Or was there a shift in your actual agency?
There was a shift in my actual agency as well.
You ever feel like your body just isn't keeping up like it used to? Life doesn't slow down. And sometimes the grind catches up. Lower energy, lagging focus, or a dip in motivation. Human Performance TRT understands the need to regain your edge. As a veteran and first responder-owned company, they're not just another telehealth provider. They take a full spectrum approach to your health, crafting personalized plans that go beyond hormones. No locked-in subscriptions, no hassle. Everything is delivered directly to your door, so you can focus on what really matters. Already on a hormone replacement program? Transition seamlessly with recent blood work. No extra tests required if your labs are under 6 months old. You ready to optimize your health? Visit hptrt.com and see what personalized care looks like. Don't forget to use the promo code TDP for 10% off your program.
Yeah, it was a conversation was had on Friday about my work comp status, which wasn't supposed to happen. But at that conversation, again, I asked for help. Like, I need help. And that was the response.
One of the things you did mention, and I don't know if this plays into it, you had a regime change as far as who was the chief several months after your shooting. Was that part of it?
Probably.
Okay. So then I'm going to jump way ahead and let's just rip the Band-Aid off. You had to eventually step away from your career.
Yeah, you could see the train coming, but you never stop fighting, right? You always you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. But when I finally realized it wasn't going to work out for me was when I went back to the same QME the following year. I had had the surgery in November. Well, they sent me to a QME in April. Well, nerve injuries take about a year to heal. And so he's like, well, you have two choices. You can retire now, or you can wait another year, and you can hope that they don't retire you in that year. Right? Because the city, if the way the penal code is written, they can retire you out if it takes more than a year for your injury to heal. And so I contacted the chief and got no response. I contacted HR and got no response for months. And so I didn't know what else to do. There was no 4850 time anymore. I had burnt through that year. I'd burnt through a year of the state disability. So now I'm on my last 70 hours of saved time. I burned through 1,000 hours of compensation time and stuff. So I have no options.
So that you actually got to the point where you were having to burn your own time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, completely. You're on the 2/3 salary, whatever it is, for a year, and you can use your time to supplement that to try and make a full income. And so I did that for a year. And then it was March, I think it was, or maybe it was May, I forget, where I went to see the QME. And then from there till August, I got little to no communication from the department or the city. For the first 6 weeks, I got nothing after the QME thing. So I ended up filing my own paperwork with the state because I got to do something. And then the city has 6 months to respond, and that was a whole nother thing. And so then I met with the city managers in August saying, like, what is going on? Like, I don't understand what's happening and why this is happening.
As you mentioned, the headlight of the oncoming train, and I get where you're coming from. You're fighting to, man, I just want to go back to work. But when it becomes apparent that it's not going to happen, was there a long process in the sense of they already had made their decision? It was your headspace where you're going to go forward. When you finally cross that bridge and like, all right, nobody here is fighting to get me back. So now I got to start thinking about what I'm going to do in my future. When you cross that bridge, was there a significant gap to, all right, let me start planning for it? Or literally was it a Friday conversation and on Monday, all right, I'm no longer a police officer officially?
Officially, that's how that happened. But before that, it was kind of a gradual process, right? It was this gradual realization that nobody is fighting to make me back. They're not asking me to come back. They're not trying to get me to come back. Nobody's helping me to get through this process, even though I'm asking for help. And so it was this gradual process. But thankfully, in the meantime, again, I didn't waste my time. I was trying to, build myself and do other things. And then one of the things I ended up doing, coincidentally, was in 2021, I started a nonprofit. And the nonprofit actually had literally nothing to do with me at that time. Our SWAT team, a lot of areas have nonprofits that support law enforcement. And our sheriff's department has one. The Sheriff's Advisory Council or Foundation has their thing, but that's basically it. We have the Slow Leaf, which is a law enforcement assistance foundation too, or assistance fund, who helps cops that are going through rough times and stuff. And they're fantastic, by the way. Slow Leaf is amazing. But there was nothing available for the police departments, et cetera. And so a good example was on the regional SWAT team, we had somebody who wanted to help us purchase a robot or replace parts to our robot. And they wanted to give us like a $10,000 donation and wanted the tax write-off because unions aren't actually, nonprofits in that sense. We had no mechanism for accepting the donation.
It's got to go through the city and then hopefully to us.
Right. But then they don't get the write-off. And so they didn't make the donation and we didn't get the money and we didn't get the robot parts. And so I'd written a staff report and we'd done all this research prior to COVID about creating a nonprofit for, us and for St. Louis County. And that kind of died on the vine, pre-COVID. And then of course COVID hit, and boy, that was the last thing anybody was worried about. And so while I had some free time on workers' comp, while I was doing other things, I did that as well. I invested some time and effort and did a bunch of research on how to do it properly and created this nonprofit. So we created the Public Safety Development Group as a law enforcement nonprofit in our county to try and do exactly that, is to facilitate those types of donations, et cetera, to support public safety. It was broader than just law enforcement because, I have a background in law enforcement, fire, and EMS, and I have connections in all of those industries, and all of our industries needed support. And so as the slow dawning of what reality was for me, that went from being just a nonprofit for those things to, well, maybe we can do training, maybe we can do this, maybe we can do that. And so it kind of turned into like a training, consulting, and charity services type of nonprofit, thinking that, well, maybe that could be the future.
From the onset, though, was it just you, or did you already have a pretty big staff?
No. And we actually don't really have a staff. We have a board of directors, and the board of directors are people that I either worked with that were either in my own agency or on the SWAT team or in local EMS, that were very supportive of the idea, basically. And I had some free time. And so once everybody else saw kind of what I was seeing too, that, hey, maybe my career is going this direction, they were more than willing to be supportive. And so the people that were on the board of directors have been nothing but amazing. The people that helped found the nonprofit were great. The nonprofit didn't do anything because when you're on workers' comp, you can't really be doing anything, right? So we just created the infrastructure, so to speak, and just it just sat there. But it's something else that we did. And we facilitated like some small scholarships, or we, did a class or something to try and test the infrastructure, but we hadn't really done anything at that point. We just created this organization, for the future, for future use, basically. And then as the light at the end of the tunnel kept, got brighter and brighter, it dawned on me more that, and my friends also had mentioned that, like, hey, maybe this is the direction that, you could go.
When we individually are in the middle of whatever it is, we often put blinders on, we get our tunnel vision, and we usually need people to our right and our left to kind of tap us on the shoulder and go, hey, you're missing something over here. Where I'm going with this is, while you're in this fight with the city and your agency, and you're tunnel focused on, I just want to get back to work. What's your family like? Is your family going, hey, dummy, they don't want you to go back. You need to start, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. I'm meaning like that voice of reality, like, hey, I get the fact and I respect that you're fighting to get back, but let's look at reality.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of people, friends, family in my life that we've had those conversations, but they were very supportive of whatever I wanted, right? And if I wanted to fight to go back to work, they were all very supportive. My friends and my family, everybody was very supportive of what I wanted. They were all concerned that I had a backup plan, which was smart, and so they were very supportive of that as well, which is how I ended up with this nonprofit being created. My friend Dave and my friend Chris and my friend Amber and and then the people that are currently involved, my friend Anthony and some doctors, Rachel and Chris, like, they're all super supportive. And they believe in what we're trying to accomplish, the vision of the nonprofit. But initially they were very supportive of me going back to work too, because that's what I wanted, but I was also pushed to, like, hey, make sure that this is set up too, and make sure you have a backup plan. And so, Dave, Chris, and Amber, the ones that helped me actually start the nonprofit, pushed me to start the nonprofit too. For the sake of the nonprofit, but also for the sake of being, having some kind of fallback plan,
right?
Because they could see things that I couldn't see, right? Like, they had a different point of view, but at no time did there were negative people in law enforcement that were like, hey, get out. This is your chance. This is your chance to get out. This is your chance. And I don't think those people, their intentions were probably good too, from their point of view. They didn't know what it's actually like on this side of the fence. I broke even. I didn't come out on some really exciting medical retirement. I'm scraping to make ends meet. I have 2 or 3 jobs right now. Like, I don't get to be retired. Oh, how's retirement? I don't get to be retired. So there isn't anything like that. So again, my friends, Dave, who's now a commander at AG, Chris, who's a paramedic supervisor, and my friend Amber, who now works for NCIS, they pushed me to, and my friend Chad, from SLO PD, who's a lieutenant, they pushed me to get this done, so that, they encouraged me to get it done just in case, but they all respected the fact that I wanted to go back to work.
So you referred to it as retirement, but what is your last date? When did you leave the agency?
I was retired on May 20th of this year.
And other than the nonprofit, what was and is the nonprofit your long-term goal to make your primary focus, or will that always remain a secondary? And what was your primary focus going forward?
So it is now, but coming out of the medical thing with work, needing to make ends meet literally right away. I've always been teaching, and I was teaching, even while I was on work comp too. And that's where I had it out, even with work comp. Oh, you can't work while you're on work comp. No. I was teaching while I was on work comp. It doesn't violate my work restrictions, but they threatened to take my salary away and all kinds of stuff. It was a big to do. And so I was always teaching at the community college. So at Cuesta Community College, I taught EMT and paramedic. At Allen Hancock College, I'm fortunate enough to teach, leadership for law enforcement and some firearms and their basic instructor class. And so I'm very lucky to do all those things.
That comment that you made about getting into a battle with workers' comp, and you previously mentioned if you were to do it all over again, one of the things you might have done even sooner is get a lawyer on board. At what point did you start getting some legal advice as far as what you could do moving forward?
So I ended up contacting our union law firm, who gave me some free advice on retainer, right? So we pay a retainer to this law firm,
right.
And the guy there, Stuart, was amazing. He had several phone calls with me that gave me some advice throughout the process to, what my rights are and what I should do or shouldn't do and what's normal and what's not. But again, hindsight, I should have just hired them right from the beginning, and not to be adversarial or anything, but just to help navigate the system, because the system is not set up for people. Like, I wanted my injury fixed and I wanted to go back to work. I could have one or the other, but I couldn't have both. I could go back to work, but not have my injury fixed. Or I could get my injury fixed and not go back to, like, it didn't work out well. The system didn't work out well for me at all. It wasn't streamlined. It was long and drawn out. It wasn't effective. Like, I should have gone to a neurologist and gotten surgery and gone back to work, right? Or figured out that the surgery didn't work, have the second surgery or whatever, not, 3-4 years later, still fighting to try and get back to work.
Well, and the thing, unfortunately, for all of us who operate in these professions, once you become significantly injured, it opens up a completely different Pandora's box. And again, it goes back to, you worked for a police agency, but that agency was a component of a city.
Sure.
And that city's overall financial budget. And they're never going to, I don't want to say never, more often than not, they're not going to be your best advocate. They're not going to be looking out for what is in the best interest of you. At the end of the day, the people in charge of the dollars and the pennies are going to be looking out for their city or their county.
Sure.
And so when you talk about bringing in a lawyer, it's not about, hey, I want to get the most. No, it's just, you need to get an advocate who understands how to deal with these processes.
Yeah, that's what I needed. You're absolutely right. I needed an advocate. I needed somebody to rattle the tree, because the people I thought I was supposed to go to do that, you're taught, you're supposed to go to your boss, you're supposed to go to HR. I wasn't getting any help. And so, I should have just right away gotten somebody to be an advocate for me. And I didn't.
The day after you were retired, your headspace, your feeling, had it just become so frustrating for you that you were actually kind of glad to close the door behind you? Or was it a hard door to close?
No, it was a sad day. No, it was a sad day. I had to go to the police department. It was a Monday. I went in, and, had to clear out my locker and do all the things that you do, right? Turn in your badge and your gun and whatever. Now the two commanders were there, and they, had a little, hamburger. They sent the detectives to go to the store real quick, and they had a quick thing. They didn't even know I was coming in, kind of thing. So it was great, but it was bitter. It was not pleasant at all. And the people that were there, you could tell the people that were there on staff felt bad too. It wasn't a pleasant thing, and it still isn't. I'm not, it's not even bittersweet. It's a sad way to end a career. I spent 21 years, in law enforcement. I was, sergeant, detective sergeant on the SWAT team as a team leader. I did all the things you do, right? Firearms and training and all of those things to provide for your agency, to provide for your community. And, I wouldn't even say that I was a line item on a budget necessarily, because that wasn't really a thing. It wasn't like they called and said, hey, we don't want to pay for this anymore or whatever. And there was not even any whispers of that. There was really no communication at all, but it was that workers' comp just wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And there was no one pushing them to get it done. Workers' comp is an insurance company. They're supposed to work for the city. The city and the administration should be able to push that process along. And when I asked for help, I wasn't getting any. And so again, I didn't have an advocate. And so that's, but yeah, no, the day after was not a day of relief. It didn't feel like that. And it was Thursday or Friday, I get a call from the new HR person saying, hey, on Monday, you need to go turn in your stuff. So it was very quick. You mentioned ripping off the Band-Aid. It was not that it wasn't expected, but it was very quick. And here, go turn in your stuff. It's, time's up.
With a little bit of time to pass, how are you doing now?
Still sad and disappointed that, I miss my job, right? I miss what I did for a living. So, there's different motivations for people in law enforcement, right? Whether it's ideology, whether it's ego, whether it's, the reward, the pay or whatever. For me, it was always ideology. Like, I believed in what we did. I believe in public safety. I believe in being a first responder. I was out to save the world one person at a time kind of thing, right? And so I believe in that. And that's what I miss about my job. All agency politics aside and all that, I liked my career and I liked my job. And so it's kind of a bummer that this is how things ended. So it's unfortunate. You kind of have to accept reality. You have to just, there's no, you can shed a tear, you can do what you want, but at the end of the day, you've got to move forward, right? There's, you can, no sitting around being a sad sack. It's not going to help anybody, especially yourself. So you have to move forward. And so you mentioned, like, what's the long-term plan? Well, right now I'm still making ends meet, right? So I'm still teaching at the colleges, at Cuesta College. I'm the director of their paramedic program currently, just to, pay the bills. But really the long-term goal is to, try and get the public safety development group to really, develop, to thrive, to expand and provide the training and stuff that we want or need. In surveying the local agencies, the classes that we're talking about putting on, they're really supportive. And so, it's a matter of getting through all the hurdles with post and getting all that stuff done. But whether we're providing, some intermediate advanced peer support training, they've wanted an active shooter instructor class because there's not many of them going around right now. And that was requested, if we could put something like that on. Tactical medicine. There's an 8-hour tactical medicine class that we've developed. We're working with our agents, some other local training groups or partners. Steve Odom runs the Spartan Tactical Solutions. Him and I have collaborated on a community tactical medicine class, but we've talked about law enforcement and incorporating firearms and stuff. Steve put together a great program called the Warrior Development Program, which is him and a guy named Jeff Takeda from Takeda Tactical Solutions from down here. Matt, and I can't pronounce his last name, but Matt's dad, Matt, is fantastic. He's part of the program. Brent Dugan, who does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Those 4 guys put together this great program, but they lacked the financial aspect of getting it off the ground last year. And so they hit me up and we ran it through a donation that came through. They came through with a donation that we were able to put their program on. So that's not my program, their program, right? But we funded this, or we helped fund this, or facilitated the donation for this program that was 2 days of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, deliberate cold exposure, cold plunge, theory and practical application, meditation, and really some good solid wellness stuff for police officers. So we did some range training. We did some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, partially because of the survivability, right? You got to survive to be well. But more importantly, microdosing adversity, right? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is one of those things where, you got some guy holding you on the ground. You don't get to just stop and give up. And so it builds resiliency in our people, because law enforcement is really great right now about putting people back together after they're damaged, right? Peer support and chaplaincy and, counseling and all those things. We're not really great at proactive. The proactive, wellness thing right now is not going so well in law enforcement. And so we've talked a lot about, well, what does that look like? Even our 3-day peer support class, the one that I created for Master Instructor program, is really focused on, we look at the seasons of a career and how can we be proactive in preventing some of the issues that we have with our people, rather than just picking up the pieces after they fall apart. And so I think that's a lot of where we want to focus a lot of our attention on. And so so I'm really hoping that this nonprofit will take off. I'm really hoping it'll develop, and I'm really hoping that with some hard work and the right connections, that we can start bringing in some good donations to put some good training on. We provided the Warrior Development Program for free, thanks to a generous donation. So 2 days of law enforcement training for free. And so that, while we have a financial model that's really inexpensive for agencies and to get people to training, it'd be really great to provide free training. So if we had an operational budget through donations and grants, that would be ideal. Right now we can finance, class by class as people pay for classes. But man, what a great world it would be if we had enough donations and grant money to provide free training. And it's all about high quality training. We've all been to enough classes that suck, right?
No, none of them. None of them.
And, but training doesn't have to suck. Why can't we have the best training? Why can't we either create it ourselves or bring in the right talent? And agencies are busy doing agency things, and sometimes they can do that and sometimes they can't. So why can't we do it? So why can't we have a local agency or a local organization in San Luis Obispo County that provides training to the agencies, that provides charity, that provides consulting, that provides all the things that these agencies still need and or want for low cost and or for free if we could find, donations and or grants. And so in a perfect world, that's what my future would look like, is helping to run this. And, I would teach a class occasionally if it's something that I specialize in, but it's more about networking. Like I mentioned, Steve had this great program, him and the other guys, they created this great program that I was lucky enough to meet up with them. And Steve and I have known each other for a long time because he was at the sheriff's department and I was at the police department. But we never met together for training. And then when we sat down and talked about training, especially when it came to resilience, we had a lot of the same ideas. Like, how do we start building our people up better? How do we start preparing them for the inevitable? You can give officers as many days off as you want. That's not going to fix the fact that they're going to see a dead child, or they're going to run into a gunfight, or they're going to end up with some other thing that causes trauma. And so why can't we prepare them better for that?
You hit something that I think is really important is, yes, we are seeing leaps and bounds after the injuries, improvements. We'll give you all the treatment in the world. These careers expose us to the worst of the worst, the portion of society that, or things that happen in our society that 99.9% of the people don't realize go on. And I don't know what the answer is to that. How do you create that vapor barrier, I'll call it, between what you're going to experience and how it's going to impact you? But it's got to be something that starts a lot earlier in our careers.
It's got to be something that starts right at the beginning. And I know Post just created their wellness LD, I think it's 14 now, that just came out this last year, maybe year before last. But you know how it is in the academy, right? You're learning everything there is to learn about being a cop. It kind of goes in one ear and out the other. I mean, we were taught a little bit about wellness in the academy, right? You had to avoid the 3 Bs and
we didn't even get a wellness component. And I'm old enough to where they were KDs. They were knowledge domains, not learning domains. So I'm really old.
Yeah.
But no, there was no wellness component. I mean, I could tell you that, yeah, I sat through a knowledge domain on vice operations. Sure. I couldn't tell. You're drinking from a fire hose in the academy. Yeah. So,
right. So we have to do better right when we're hiring these people to not only train them to do the job, but train them to deal with the job. When it comes to physical stress, emotional, mental health stress, when it comes to financial stresses, we all know what happens. It's very, to steal Gordon Graham, right? Predictable is preventable. We know what a law enforcement career looks like right from the beginning. We know about keeping up with the Joneses. We know about hazing. We know about all the emotional stress that comes with law enforcement careers. So why can't we do something about it? Why aren't we investing more time and effort into training, into maybe counseling from the beginning, or peer support as a proactive model, things to create an environment where we're setting these people up for success, where we're setting our officers and deputies up for success rather than just trying to pick up the pieces afterwards, and to build resiliency takes adversity. You don't get to just be resilient one day. You don't get to go to counseling and be resilient. Most of the studies on resiliency talk about, well, you have to endure some trauma to become resilient. Okay, well, then how do we microdose that adversity? And that's where things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is great, or any of the other things that we do. You have realistic firearms training, force on force training with simunitions or whatever. those things, I'll tell you 100% make a big difference. When we went into the riverbed on June 11th for the shooting, when the shooting occurred, we knew what we were walking into. We knew that we were probably going to be ambushed. We talked about it the entire day. We talked about quick reaction drills. We talked about what we were going to do, so that when it happened, it wasn't, a panic. It was, oh, here we go. Don't get me wrong. There were some expletives, and you can hear those on the body camera, but it was more about, here we go. Here's what we need to do. Here's what we got to get done. And it was more about, we've practiced for this. We've talked about it. We've trained, and so let's get it done. And I think a lot of that had, helped with the successful outcome, but more importantly, the recovery afterwards, and then I think what did a lot of damage to people was what happened right afterwards. How do we deal with the second guessing? How do we deal with the Monday morning quarterbacking? How do we deal with all the shit talking and the tearing of people down? Don't get me wrong. I want accountability. And most officers do, right? Law enforcement wants and needs accountability, but there's a difference between holding people accountable for mistakes, which we should be doing 100%, versus tearing people down because we disagree or we think we could do it better. I went to a counselor that was not culturally competent. And one of the things they said to me was, well, we don't treat people like that. And people don't treat people like that. Or they couldn't believe that, or they would say, they give you the typical, well, that's just, they have insecurity issues. They think they could do better. And they say that because they're insecure. No, they're arrogant. We actually think we could do better. When we tell people that, oh, we could do better than that, it's because we actually think we can. And it's not insecurity, it's overconfidence, but until you've been there, until you've been in that situation, you have no idea how it's going to impact you. But that's where training comes in. If you could bring training in from beginning and we try to, but while you're training on, force on force and firearms, you've got how many other legally mandated training things. So it's a matter of getting wellness as a priority and not just lip service, right? Not just, we want wellness rooms and fish tanks and stuff like that. We really need wellness. We really need wellness programs that invest in people, that build their resilience, so that when they encounter the inevitable, that they're going to come through okay. It doesn't mean they're not going to need peer support still. It doesn't mean they're not going to need chaplaincy or counseling. They should have all of those as well, but that we can put people back together more successfully rather than, every time something happens, we lose people.
I think one of the things that often gets, I'll call it overlooked. And you bring up a great point. Your team was involved in a situation. You as the team leader, and I'm assuming probably, if I know most SWAT teams, there was some input even from every member on the team,
sure,
how we were going to address the situation. And we handled it. And yes, from another SWAT team, hey, we might have done it this way. We probably would have ended up at the same result. We might have just taken a different path to it. And as tactical operators, we accept that. Hey, tell us how you might have done it and how we might not do it in the future, or how we could change it in the future. Where I'm going with this, though, is when people outside of that circle start throwing their stones, it is so important for leadership to step up and almost make it to where you don't even realize, you being the operators, you being the team, you being that team leader, doesn't even realize that rocks are being thrown. Because hopefully your leadership steps in and goes, if there's something that needs to be corrected, we'll correct it. But my team and my guys did what they were supposed to do. They got the job done. Assuming that, again, like you said, there are some times where it's completely out of policy. It's clearly obvious. Hey, you just completely screwed the pooch. But if it's just another entity going, well, we wouldn't have done it that way. You weren't there. You get the opportunity of Monday morning quarterbacking it.
Sure. Well, and don't get me wrong, in any big operation like that, there are mistakes that are made, and we should be held accountable for those mistakes. We should talk about those mistakes. We should talk about why. We should be sharing that information with other people, because when is the next time they're going to have another incident like this? It's going to be a long time, right? But by sharing the mistakes that we actually made, why LASD is really good about this. Their debriefs talk about, well, we messed this up and we messed that up and we messed this up. That's what we should be doing. Not just throwing rocks at each other, but like, let's ask the hard questions and let's have the answers. Somebody should be like, hey, why did this happen? Well, let's talk about it. Let's explain it. And we can have a difference of opinion, like you said, if it's a style thing or whatever, or we can say, hey, I made a mistake. Like I mentioned earlier, there's lots of things I'd do differently, and not just getting shot, right? Like I would do lots of other things differently as well. But that's the benefit of hindsight. The decisions we made for reasons. And I'd love to share those reasons with people so that people can learn from what we did. It wasn't like let's put on our cowboy hats and yeehaw into the riverbed. They were all tactical. We were all experienced people that made decisions. And, with our limited experience, as you are in a part-time tactical team, right? But we made the best decisions we thought we could at the time. Were there mistakes made? Absolutely. Did we catch the bad guy? Did he hurt anybody else? No, the mission was accomplished. We did exactly what we were supposed to do, but no one said that. It was all about everything else. And so you're right. Like, where's the people saying, hang on, time out, let's fix this. And that didn't happen.
Or even just the, whoa.
Right.
Okay, you made your point. There's no reason to keep throwing the rocks.
Right.
I think that, to me, that's where good leadership comes in and really kind of steps in and says, I'm going to take care of my people.
Yep.
Going forward for you mentioned the nonprofit, but I'm looking more from the personal side. Did you ultimately opt for the second surgery? Are you planning that? What are you thinking is going to be your future?
I'm still weighing that out, to be perfectly honest. My concern is the first surgery it fixed one problem, it created another problem. Doing the same surgery, higher up on the leg could fix everything, or could, create more of what I've got going on now, which will affect a bigger part of my leg. So is it livable now? Sure. Is it uncomfortable? Sure. Does it hurt? Do I have issues with numbness? Like even just taking a shower and, trying to wash my lower leg, I end up with numbness and pain and whatever. But will the surgery fix that, or will it create a bigger problem with that, or a similar problem? And so I'm hesitant. So I haven't decided yet. I'm wrestling with it. It's something I'm really on the fence about.
Now, you mentioned quite a few people who are operating in the wellness space. From your perspective and your mental wellness, do you still talk to somebody?
Oh yeah. And I'm actually looking for somebody new because the person I was talking to retired. And so I need to find somebody, if you're not talking to somebody that, if you're in your career and you've had some of these issues, you need to talk to somebody. I mean, why aren't we talking to somebody at least once a year, just as a check-in? The days of commiserating with your buddies over drinks, that's already been proven that it doesn't really work very well. Don't get me wrong. There's a time and a place for that kind of thing. And there always has been. We've had lots of tragedy in our county in the last couple of years, and there's definitely a time and a place for getting together and but maladaptive coping, where people are circling the drain and having all these major issues. We need to address those things, and we need to have wellness as a priority, kind of from the top down in every agency, and not lip service. It needs to be tangible. It needs to be accessible. It needs to overcome the stigma, and it needs to check all the boxes, all the key words that you hear everybody talk about. And so I think a lot of people don't know how to do that. And we're still trying to figure it out. We figured out the reactive stuff. So how do we figure out the proactive stuff? And I'd like to see that happen. And working with some of the people that we've talked about, we're trying to figure it out.
Any last pieces of advice that you could give, especially somebody who's maybe in the middle of something similar, an injury, or where they're dealing with their organization?
Well, I would say the first thing I would tell everybody is, and I think you've even mentioned this on some of your previous podcasts, is it can happen to you. Everybody needs to realize that your career could be over in the blink of an eye, and it may not even be your fault, right? You could be doing the right things. You could make the right decisions. You could make a mistake. It doesn't matter. You could trip over a curb or fall backwards, and your career could be over in the blink of an eye. The best prevention to that is training. The best prevention to that is the right mindset and be in a good space when you're at work, trying to make the right decisions. But heaven forbid, if something does happen to somebody like that, make sure you fight the fight. You need to be on top of it from day one. Don't expect anybody to be looking out for you. Your friends will, look out for you. They'll give you advice. Will they go to bat for you? Depends on your agency politics. I found that out the hard way. So you need to have an advocate. You need to have somebody, and it doesn't have to be a lawyer, because it's not about trying to create that conflict, but you need to have somebody that's going to help you figure out what your goals are. So figure out what you want, right? I wanted to go back to work. I didn't know the best path for that. I thought I was taking the best path for that. I thought I was going through the process, trying to get the right medical treatment. I didn't have an advocate pushing the process along. When I realized, or should have realized, that I wasn't getting support where I needed it, I should have found someone or hired someone to provide that support for me, to push the process forward, to get me where I wanted to be. So I think, taking a tactical pause and figuring out, what is it that you want? Are you trying to go back to work? Are you fighting for your job? Like, truly fighting? What drives you? You know, was this a job, or was this a career? Was this a calling? All the things we talk about, right? I wanted to be at work. And so if you're like me and you want to be at work, you need to get that advocate, because you need someone who understands the right language, who understands the processes, who understands what your rights are and timelines, to hold people accountable for those timelines and those kinds of things. So get yourself somebody like that. If you want to go in a different direction, hopefully you've set yourself up right. Cops today need to be educated and have backup plans for your backup plans, because even your backup plan may not work out. You better have 2 or 3 plans. You can't just sit back and go, okay, when I retire, I'm going to ride off into the sunset and I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to play music and I'm going to do this because that was my plan. I'll teach part-time. And then all of a sudden that retirement's now and not years from now. Well, I can't just play music because I have to make a living. I can't just teach part-time. And so your backup plan might be your primary plan. And if that plan fails, maybe then, because you want to be, let's say you want to be an entrepreneur or something. And well, maybe that didn't work out because your first, idea of, opening a dog walking business didn't work out. So you need to have another plan. But I think knowing what your priorities are, what makes you tick, why are you doing what you're doing? I'll go back to core motivations, right? I'm an idealist. I believe in what we do in public safety. And so that's why I still want to stay in the public safety space. That's why I didn't go become a lawyer. That's why I didn't go become a doctor. I could have gone to PA school. I could have gone to, lawyer school or whatever. I'm smart enough, but I still believe in what we're doing. And so instead of being the guy doing it now, maybe I can help take care of the people that are doing it now. Maybe I can help the industry move forward rather than just, being a commander at the police department where I can affect my little bubble. Maybe I can affect a larger bubble. And not just me, but we, right? I've been partnering with all kinds of great people, and we're looking for more people to partner with, people who have something valuable to bring to the table, whether it's, a great training idea or, help us figure out the resiliency thing. Or if, somebody can make donations or somebody's good at social media, whatever it is, we're going to get there together. Even like your podcast, it's all about working together, right? To make the future better for public safety, for law enforcement. Not one of us is going to do that. We all have to play and provide and bring to the table our skills and work with other people who have the other skills to try and make public safety better.
One of the things I've been very fortunate is having guests who have had the rug pulled out from underneath them and their career taken. And what I've really appreciated most is, just like you, is finding that new mission to still be able to give back, but potentially being able to do more and give back on a bigger scale than if that incident or that event had never happened.
Yeah, I would give people a warning that it is not the same. You have that sense of mission and purpose, right? When you're in law enforcement or public safety, you have that mission and purpose, whether you realize it or not. You're part of a team, you're part of an organization, you're part of a brotherhood, you're part of a thing. And that's gonna change for you when you retire. And there's nothing you can do about that. That it's a change and you have to accept it. And whatever you do may or may not be more fulfilling. It might be less fulfilling, but you have to have a mission and purpose, and you have to keep pushing on. Surround yourself with people that are supportive, that have the same vision. Create that shared vision that we always talk about in leadership classes, right? And get people excited, because that's where you're going to feel that sense of purpose and that sense of accomplishment as you meet milestones and you celebrate those milestones with the people around you. You have to be able to do that, because it's going to change. You can't, I don't know of any way to recreate that sense of mission and purpose in law enforcement or public safety. I haven't found it, so you move on to a new mission or a new purpose, and it has benefits and it has drawbacks. Maybe you have more free time. Maybe you have holidays off. Maybe you have nights and weekends off, but you're missing some of the camaraderie or the dealing with emergencies or whatever it is that makes you tick. Right. So I would just caution everybody that it's going to change, whether you get the rug pulled out from you or even people that do retire on their own. Some people retire on their own and ride off into the sunset and do exactly what they wanted to do. But you hear story after story of people who retire and all of a sudden they feel lost and they feel like, because it's going to change. And educating people about that ahead of time, like what we're doing right now, is key to helping stem some of these issues we're having to help address it. And so that's the caution I would give to people is whether you have your backup plan or your backup to backup plan, you have to understand that life is going to change for you. In some ways for the better, some ways for the worse, but you need to make sure that you can navigate those changes successfully. I would say attack that new mission with the same, tenacity that you did when you were in law enforcement. Physical training doesn't change. Still go to the gym, still do the things you were going to do. Stay proficient in those things. It helps with your credibility, but it also helps with your mental health, right? Keep a good routine, but attack that new mission or that new endeavor with the same tenacity that you did when you went to the police academy. That's what's going to make you successful. And that's what's going to help your mental health and your ultimate well-being.
Like I opened with this, I appreciate you taking the time to drive down here. And I truly appreciate you sharing your time and your story. And I wish you all the best.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me, Paul. I really appreciate it.